Welcome back to the Legend of Billy Shears, a hidden revolution. Thanks for joining me, and remember to like and share. Remember, the Legend of Billy Shears videos are directed towards an intermediate to advanced audience in the Beatles and Paul is Dead conspiracies. If you are a beginner, you may not feel comfortable with the material being presented. For this video, you will need to understand that biological Paul McCartney died in 1966 and was replaced by a person who I call Billy Shears. This video examines who Billy Shears really is, where he came from, and who his biological mother really was. I thought we might backtrack a bit and take a closer look at Miss Pat, the person who I believe is Billy Shears' biological mother. For those who have watched my videos before, much of the information you may recognize. However, I think it is important to go back and review the reasons that make me so convinced about who Billy Shears' mother was. Miss Pat is the key to understanding many of the Beatles conspiracies that we hear about today. Miss Pat was born March 16, 1915 in Cornwall to Phyllis Marion Gotch and Patrick Daughtry. Her given name was Deirdre Patricia Maureen Daughtry, but most called her Patsy. I affectionately call her Miss Pat. In her lifetime, we know that she used the following surnames: Gotch. In Cornwall, it was common to call someone by their family name, and in this case, it was her maternal grandparents' name. Other surnames include McAlpine, McClellan, and Daughtry. Aleister Crowley referred to her as the girl Pat. Not many details are available about Miss Pat and her childhood. She grew up in Cornwall with a very bohemian lifestyle surrounded by artists and intellectuals. Her mother, Phyllis, was a nightclub singer and traveled extensively, leaving Miss Pat to mostly be raised by her grandparents, Thomas and Caroline Gotch. Her father was killed in World War I, and she never had an opportunity to meet him. Thomas and Caroline Gotch were artists, painters that had transplanted to Cornwall along with a group of other artists who loved the beautiful seaside landscape, and they desired to use common, hard-working, everyday people as their subjects. Thomas and Caroline loved to use their daughter Phyllis in their paintings, and if you ask me, their granddaughter too, Miss Pat. The Gotch family lived in a generational home called Wheel Betsy. It is important to note that Caroline Berlin Yates Gotch was born in Liverpool. I believe that Miss Pat was named after the Irish mythology tale of Deirdre of Sorrows, whose life was foretold to bring sorrow, particularly through love. It was a tale of beauty, lust, and death. To greatly summarize the story, a druid made a prophecy that the infant Deirdre would be the most beautiful woman in all of Ireland. However, the child would bring sorrow and war to the country because of her significant beauty. The king decided to spare the child's life and keep her for himself since she was going to be so beautiful. She was fostered. She was sent to someone else to be raised. At the age of consent, she would be expected to marry the king. Deirdre did indeed turn out to be very beautiful. She dreamed of her future love, who would have hair the color of a raven. She did eventually meet a handsome young warrior that looked just like this, and to escape the king, she fled with her lover to Scotland. This would be a similar area, but not exact, of Scotland where High Park Farm, Billy Shears' farm, is located. Deirdre and her lover had 2 children, a son, Shears, and a daughter who were fostered. They were raised by someone other than themselves. Eventually, the king lost his patience in the matter and sent spies over to see if Deirdre was indeed still beautiful and to assess the situation. One of the spies was noticed by Deirdre's lover, and a gold chess piece was launched at the spy, putting out one eye. The spy, however, was able to make it back to report to the king and told him of her beauty and of her lover. The king had Deirdre's lover and brothers killed, but Deirdre was spared. Sometimes the war that was started over Deirdre is referred to as the Irish Iliad. After the death of her lover, the king took Deirdre to be his wife. After many months, she was still being very cold to him. The king decided to give Deirdre to the men who had killed her lover, since these were the ones she hated the very most. During transport in the chariot, she was taunted and told that she looked like a ewe between two rams. That was comparing her to a sheep. At this point, she flung herself out of the chariot, dashing her head on a rock and perishing. I really encourage you all to do a little homework on Deirdre of Sorrows. There are many videos out there, various written versions. However, it is probably better if you do not opt to read a summary of the story. There are many clues that will jump out at you in the names, places, and objects.
Two pizzas and two sides for just $19.99? Domino's per...
Like her father, Miss Pat's first husband, intelligence agent Captain James McAlpine, died in April 1941 while serving in World War II. We know that Miss Pat had a baby in May 1939 after a moonchild ritual with Aleister Crowley. The relationship between the two is well documented. Miss Pat and Crowley remained friends throughout his life, and she was at his bedside when he died. Now remember, we do know from the book Memoirs of Billy Shears that Billy Shears was born in 1939. This baby was named Randall Jeer by his mother. Note the middle name is Jeer. That's a name from the Sorrows story and translates to gear, as in McGear. He was called Alistair Ataturk by his father. In several videos, we see the image of Miss Pat. In Dance Tonight, we see her in the pantry. Funny how her partner is raven-haired. We also see her on the stairwell. We see her image twice in Pipes of Peace. Lacking clarity, I believe we see her in Waterfalls. Miss Pat was tall with long, wavy red hair. In the video Ever Present Past, we see a room full of tall dancers that are all wearing wigs with long, wavy red hair. If you watch the making of Ever Present Past, you will find out that finding all of those red-haired wigs was difficult and very expensive, meaning that Billy Shears was firm about the dancers having long, wavy red hair. Also, there are other videos that feature the same baby she is holding in Pipes of Peace. This can be found in Waterfalls and Free as a Bird. Of course, I believe the baby is Billy Shears. It appears that some of the Gotch paintings feature Miss Pat. This would not be a stretch, as her mother Phyllis was prominently featured in their artwork. In Bill's work, there are tons of references to Pat's native Cornwall, for example, in the lyrics. The photo behind Bill's desk is of Cornwall and was likely taken from a nearby stone circle. The photo of Crowley on the rocks with young Ataturk, also known as Billy Shears, was taken in Cornwall. I wonder if Pat was the photographer of this photo. Also, the revisiting of the rock during the filming of Magical Mystery Tour on the beach in Cornwall. Yes, that is the same rock. The Magical Mystery Tour was Billy's homecoming to Cornwall. Then we have Egypt Station, a nod to his mother, Miss Pat, who served as a base cipher officer in Egypt during World War II. She was stationed there and had her grandmother and 3 children in tow. Finally, how much she looks like Bill. Please remember, it tells us in Memoirs of Billy Shears that Billy had plastic surgery done on his nose and his chin so that he would favor biological Paul McCartney more. In Chapter 44, page 405 of Memoirs, you will find Miss Pat double encoded within the chapter. First, in the acrostical encoding where it talks about Bill's mother. However, Tom Harriet released an acrostical booklet himself, so I guess there was more. Looking on page 406, you will see the name Patsy encoded, telling us that Miss Pat really is the biological mother of Billy Shears. In 1933, Miss Pat was presented as a debutante in Buckingham Palace. This suggests a background of privilege. Prior to her relationship with Crowley, she was in a relationship with Major Robin Thynne. He was much older than her, and they lived together in the village of Paul, Cornwall. They both had a love for the occult and occult studies. It is through him that she likely originally became acquainted with Aleister Crowley. When hearing that Crowley was involved in a lawsuit, she traveled to London to watch the trial and met with him afterwards, where they decided to have a moonchild ritual and produce a baby. There is evidence that Miss Pat was involved in the Penwith Coven. With her love of the occult and having friends such as Crowley, this should not be a surprise to anyone. It is important to note for future videos that in witchcraft, children are often fostered or raised by another who helps them learn their intended use or craft. Miss Pat died in Lapford, Devon in 1992. This is just about 30 to 40 miles away from Tavistock. So what do you think about Miss Pat? Have I proven my case that she is the biological mother of Billy Shears? There is much more information, but I am going to try to do shorter videos about each family member or significant player in this conspiracy and how they fit into the puzzle. If this were a game of tic-tac-toe, Miss Pat would occupy the center square, as most roads seem to lead back to her. I invite you to watch as I uncover more about Billy Shears, who he is, and how he is still today conducting a hidden revolution. If you enjoyed today's video, please hit the like button and share it with your Beetle Conspiracy friends. I routinely disable a comment section. However, you are welcome to email me at legendofbillyshears@gmail.com.
Opioid addiction gets between you.
In 1934, Crowley began a libel case against a writer who described him as a black magician. He was desperate for money and believed he might be awarded damages. Examples of Crowley's pornographic poetry were read out in court, and then the wife of Raoul Loveday, the young man who died in the Abbey of Thelema, gave evidence of Crowley's depravity. The judge was appalled, saying that in 40 years of justice, he had never heard of such wickedness. Crowley lost the case and ended up bankrupt. But even after such a humiliating defeat, his extraordinary magnetism was undiminished.
After a court case that Crowley loses, a young woman called Deirdre McKellum comes up to him and says, "I want to have your child," basically. And Crowley agrees, and they go off together, and they perform a ritual to have a magical son, a sort of a magical heir for Crowley. And they perform various rituals, and they do have this son, and his name is Aleister Ataturk.
Well, after he took me in his arms on the doorstep, that beastly lodging which had lace curtains at the window, I don't know where it was now, he said, "I want you and I want your child." Well, I wanted a child, and I just started from there. Then he came round and saw me off. He had to give up drugs. pretty well give up bloods for 6 months, 3 months, because he couldn't conceive very easily. I suppose I conceived the other thing.
That was the only child who, in the everyday concept, I think he really loved, whom he wanted to see have a future.